Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. On the show today, we've had the first official full shebang test at Sepang. Who's looking fast? Who's falling over? And who's got work to do? Remember, if you want to send us a question, you can voice note us, do it on your phone, and email podcast@crash.net along with your name, where you're from. Keep it to 30 seconds, or you can just send us a question in on social media and we'll get it out for you on the show. The recording date is Monday, the 13th of February. My name is Harry Benjamin. Pete McLaren, Crash's MotoGP editor, is here as always, alongside former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Hewin. And there is so much to talk about after this first proper test. We had the shakedown. Now we've had a few days at Sepang. Let's start, Pete, with looking at Ducati, shall we? Let's go sort of team by team, manufacturer by manufacturer. It looks like it's going to be Ducati dominance, really, doesn't it?
I mean, it couldn't have gone much better for them, could it? I mean, yeah, they've learned, I think, from last year where they made sort of a few too many changes with a bike that was very competitive at the end of 21. It wrong-footed them for the start of 22. They've learned for this year. They have brought updates. They brought a new engine. Pecco and the factory guys, all the GP23 riders, all four of them at Pramac and the factory team, they've been working on that, but already they seem comfortable with it. Possibly Bastianini is still quicker on last year's bike, but Pecco very happy with it. Jorge Martin, after day 2 of the test, was saying, I'm ready to race. Let's go. And that's with the new bike. Now that's, you contrast with what was going on, and we'll get to it later, at other teams like Honda and things like that who've got all these new bikes still, or all these different bikes, all these different parts. And then you've got Ducati guys with the new bike saying, yep, let's go. Let's start the racing. So, yeah, I mean, they were fast. They were at the top end, dominated the timesheets over the single lap. Luca Marini fastest again, as he was at Valencia. So, he's going to be a threat, isn't he, in qualifying and by extension the sprint race. This year, he did a sprint race simulation, one of only 2 guys to do it, only him and Rins. And he was on average half a second a lap faster than Rins. Now, okay, Rins is new to the bike, everything else. But still, it was... his pace in that sprint race was basically quicker than most of the pace at the Grand Prix last October. Obviously only over half the distance, but there we are. So lots of good signs for Ducati. I mean, a lot of good riders up there. Throttle connection was the one thing that Pecco Bagnaia was working on. He mentioned that a few times. He's a very smooth rider. But the last hour of the last day, big step with the electronics, feeling great. They've still got to decide on maybe fairings, but, no big problems for them. And in the words of Aleix Espargaro, the Ducati still looks like the bike to beat.
I think we knew that before we got to the test, really, didn't we? It's just been underlined and confirmed, and the aero battle is massive. But I think you touched on the throttle pickup. I mean, the Ducati's a little harsh on the throttle pickup. When you want that smooth transition from coming off the throttle back onto it again, that tiny millisecond of pickup is very important to get right, so you don't destabilise the bike. So tiny little. I read this morning, the Beast and Bagnaia are still looking to try and improve the bike. There's still improvements that they want to make, and that's really down to the fact that they didn't get all of the test time that they needed out there because of the drizzle in the morning and the rain in the afternoon. Cut short, focused that the track wasn't in best of condition all of the time, so they're still lacking in test time. And the other issue that seems to have come up as well, it doesn't matter how well they get all of these bikes across all of the manufacturers to get them dead right, the new tyre pressure sensor is giving them that little bit of trepidation, if you like, in getting that bang on dead right. Once I get past 2.2 bar, why do we measure things in bar? It never seems to be right to me. It seems like a wrong scale. Why don't they go PSI? I like pounds per square inch. At least when you've got 36 in there, if you're half a square inch, half a PSI difference, you can see it much easier. So 2.2 bar, I think, is the cutoff at the top. You crash. Basically, the tyre has ballooned at the front. It's wrong profile at that point. So if you're in traffic and you set your tyre pressures up to come to their operating temperature in a different scenario to the one that you're actually in, you could find yourself with a higher pressure, particularly in the front, that is going to give you a massive problem and probably a crash. This is something they're going to have to work out with that average that the is designated as being the sweet spot between 1.8 bar, I think it is the minimum that they're allowed. 2.2 bar though, when you get up to that high. So if it's a 1.8 bar starting position, you've got to, so much of that race has got to be above that, on it or above it. So you can start a little bit lower than that, allow for temperature rising during the course of the race. But if you're wrong, you're going to get chucked out of the race. This is, for me, it's the critical article for the rest of this year. To get that right is going to win or lose races in some respects. And also what you alluded to with regards to the single lap times, Pete, was qualifying is going to be everything this year. If you can't qualify, and we're going to be talking about the Yamaha in a moment, as soon as we got to these quick times where you needed to stick them in, Yamaha was nowhere there. And I think that is going to be a major issue this year. You can't afford to be on the third row, fourth row. You've got to be on the front two rows minimum, really, to make this work. Everybody is so close. The top riders were all within a second at Sepang, with all those differences that are coming to fore now. I mean, the aero, the day that the manufacturers allowed aero to get involved in this, they must be ruining that at the moment. Everybody has Formula One background, if you like, to be able to work on. Aprilia are really ahead of the game here as well, doing a great job from Nuale. The Nuale factory are working really well on this and challenging Ducati. But Yamaha have no inherent aerodynamicist or otherwise within the factory. So Yamaha are at a real disadvantage over what's going on aerodynamically. You got Ferrari backing up Ducati and Nuale factory of Aprilia, as far as I'm aware, and everyone else. Red Bull obviously are backing up the KTMs. You've got a situation where every factory has got some. Honda perhaps have got their own aero people as well, but it's Yamaha that doesn't have. So with this ground effects that we're getting now, if you like, on the front wheel as well. You see the thing on the Aprilia, it's absolutely fantastic to watch what's going on as far as the overall ground effect side of things. When these bikes are leant over now, we are working on aero to squidge the tyres into the deck. It's going to be a very interesting year from that side of things, but still not enough time to test it, seriously.
Yeah, they're actually on the tyre pressure, Keith, it's a good point. Some rider, Alex Marquez actually said, look, I don't think we should have it on the front. He thinks it's just going to be too difficult to do. And he said, exactly your point, you're going to finish the race, have the guys on the podium, well, you might get pulled off it again if it turns out that your average was too low. So, and he agreed with it on the rear tyre, but he said on the front tyre, it's just too hard to measure. And he said, what can you do? They will get some sort of system on the dashboard to tell them their pressure, as they do now, if it goes too high, to sort of warn them. So they'll have an idea in the race of where their pressure is. But he said, if you're leading, what are you going to do? Oh, my pressure's too low. I need to follow someone. Do you wave someone by and tuck in behind them? So it is something that all the riders, it seems, are quite concerned about. And apparently, they've already met and talked about it. Now, we've got 3 races where, the rule is not going to be enforced. So there'll be the first 3 rounds, there won't be any of this. And then it's up to all of the teams and everyone else to come up with a system of how many laps will you have to be under the pressures and all this kind of thing. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see in those first 3 rounds what happens.
They're not unintelligent people. We're talking about top end here on everything that's going on at MotoGP. They manage it pretty well in Moto2. I have no doubt that they will get around the situation. But you're right, it is a concern for the riders because they're not interested in any of this. They just want a motorbike that performs. They don't want to be in a situation where they've got to manage a tyre's pressure while they're riding. If you're out front, you're right, it's going to be a lower pressure because you've got nothing in front of you that's giving you hot air off the bikes in front. If you're in a pack fighting, which I think we're going to see quite a lot of this year, that temperature can go off the scale. It can be all of a sudden you've got no grip at the front. As I say, it completely alters you tip it into a turn, the tyre squishes down, gives you a nice contact patch. If it's ballooned, down you go, and potentially taking out anyone that's around you. So it's a compounded effect. So you're going to have to work hard on this with Michelin, with the organisers, obviously, with the IRTA and the technical teams to make sure it doesn't get to the point where it becomes dangerous. Otherwise, as Marc Marquez has said, what's the point in having a tyre pressure in the front? You might as well. You've still got to have a minimum because there is a safety minimum. We've heard this in car racing before. I'll get you on the car racing subject, Harry. I always do. In car racing, you've got a situation where they want to run as minimum as they can in some circumstances. Well, then it becomes dangerous. Then the tyre becomes deformed on the rim and so on and so forth, and you can have all sorts of other problems. So Michelin won't want to be going below a certain point. It's like you say, Pete, it's a question of how many laps during the race do you have to be above a certain amount to not get pulled off the podium if you've been lucky enough to be on there.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? The actual values are not changing, as you say, the 1.8 at the back, 1.9 at the front, whatever it is. But those aren't changing. It's just how they're going to measure it, isn't it? How they're going to enforce it. That's what's changed. But that's going to make them be more careful and make them stay higher on the pressure side, because of the risk of getting disqualified if you drop below. But coming back to the Ducatis, I guess one thing we should mention is Luca Marini. Yes, he's on Pecco Bagnaio's, let's say, bike from last year. But of course, that wasn't the bike that Luca Marini was on last year. he was on a GP22, but he had a different engine. And it seems like sort of he pretty strongly hinted that, he can feel this bike is better. He had the, let's say, full 22 engine. We spoke about it at the beginning of last season. The factory guys, Jack Miller and Francesco Bagnaia, went back to sort of this hybrid. They used bits of the years before as engine, so 21 engine, because it wasn't, again, the throttle connection and power delivery that Keith was talking about. They felt it was better going back a bit. Whereas the other guys, Zarco, Jorge Martin and Marini, they were left on the more aggressive engine, if you like. And so the bike, although Marini's staying, in theory, on the 22 bike, he had a 22 bike last year, it's not actually the same. He has got this slightly different engine. And I think that's all helping with these sort of lap times he's taking. No new parts, he's just going out there and riding, which again, as Keith has mentioned, keep it nice and simple. Let the factory guys work through all the other stuff and you get it later. Okay, but we saw Enea Bastianini can make that work.
I'm sorry to dart and backwards and forwards as we are at the moment, because this is what a testing type program is all about, isn't it? But tyres and aero linked as well, if I might just get back to that boring old subject of the black round things that are stuck on there as well, because the new aero, we do not know yet definitively how that is going to affect tyre pressures. If you've got aero that are squidging tyres into the ground and so on and so forth, and the teams are working their way through this scenario as well, it will depend on what aero they depend in the end that they go with during the course of the season. So those first few meetings where this is not set in stone as far as the rule is concerned is critical for anybody running this new stuff. When you get to race distance, they didn't, as I said right at the beginning, they didn't have enough time in Sepang for going through all these kind of scenarios that they needed to go through. So racing is going to be testing in the first few rounds. Somewhere like Portimao, is that going to show us anything particularly? I'm not too sure, because that's the kind of balls out racetrack that riders like, and probably they're not going to be worried too much about testing these bits and bobs, or maybe they will. It's going to be a great year. I can't. I tell you what, I've never watched a test from so far away with so much interest in my life. I've been reading everything. My wife is going bonkers around here because all I've done is look at bloody computer screens and my phone and all the rest of it. And I moan at everybody else about doing that in the house.
Yeah, it's a shame they couldn't televise it.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, it is very difficult to televise a test because they're all in black bikes. You can never really see what they're going. And, Pete was there, but, everybody's out there. But journos tend to plagiarise each other a little bit during the course of a test because you can't cover the ground. You've got to read what someone else is writing, and then you go and look, and then you make it up for yourself. And if you're a television crew, you're only going to have 2 or 3 cameras that are on site in pit lane, and you can bet your bottom dollar they'll be in the wrong place when you need to look at something. And it's really cruel for a television team to be out at a test. And to be honest, you've got to be a hardened enthusiast to have your monitor, like us, have your monitor on all day long, because there is hours of stuff that isn't very interesting.
Yeah,
especially if I'm commentating.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they televised
exactly?
the F1.
What do you mean exactly?
Yeah, well, I'm just agreeing with you, Keith, for a change. They do it in F1, though, don't they? But then it's a bit different, I think.
Yeah, they're boring all of the time. You lot are used to it.
I'm not gonna rise to it.
I'm just firing that one in there. Fishing.
Right. Let's get back on track, shall we? Ducati clearly, as was expected, are fast. They were fast across all 3 days. 3 different riders: Martin, Bezzecchi, and Marini. I thought it was actually speaking on what you've just talked about, especially with Bezzecchi and Marini. Certainly, they've been catching a lot of eyes. I think Bezzecchi also saying, though, despite the bikes obviously all being quite competitive amongst Ducati themselves, with Aprilia also looking fast too. It's actually, he thinks the real difference is actually it's going to be the riders that you've got to watch out for, not the difference in bikes.
And you have got quite a lot of different attitudes, quite a lot of different, cerebral type riders as well. Miguel Oliveira still carry on about the likes of him when we speak to him about on the Aprilia and so on. We're going to have quite a lot going on here. Jorge Martin, he's got a great chunk out of his hand. He was riding that last day with. And that hurts, believe me, when you have got that bit of your palm of your hand missing. I'm really, really looking forward to the first round at Portimao. I mean, I think that we've not even scratched the surface of where these bikes are headed this year yet, with the amount of technical stuff that has come to the fore. Who's going to get lucky with the whole package? Ducati came into this season with a massive advantage, and they've continued that at the moment. Aprilia, though, you've got to watch for that factory, the tiny little Noale factory. it's looking good from the end of last year, and they reckon they've got another motor on the bench as well that might give a little bit more performance. I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting.
Well, you've gone there, Keith. So let's pick up with Aprilia next, shall we? Pete, Keith just said it there, but they seem to have found some small improvements, especially after a hell of a year that they had last year. But it still seems like it's not quite enough at this current stage to catch Ducati. Aleix Espargaro seems to be quite frustrated, especially on the final day as well. But Maverick Vinales certainly putting in fast lap times as well, as we already spoken about Miguel Oliveira too.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it sounded like they made lots of small improvements. So every little area, they've done a lot. Again, Keith mentioned aero with Aprilia. They've done, loads of little tweaks to their aero. They've kept the ball rolling on that. They are sort of leading the way, aren't they? If you said a few years ago, everyone will be copying Aprilia, you'd have some raised eyebrows, wouldn't you? But now,
It's a great point, Pete, because it's the first time I've ever known Ducati copy someone else when it comes to stuff like that, and they're copying Aprilia.
They all laughed.
Well, yeah, well, it does just show, it shows that, you can work through the whole concession system. Let's say you can start at the back of the grid and you can, end up at the front. So, there is hope, because it always used to be that, you'll never beat the established guys. They have all this experience. But Aprilia, they've come in and we had a lot of question marks. This is their first year without concessions, but good start from them. We won't know until they go racing, of course. But, just standing at the front of the pits, seeing them taking the wing off, unscrewing the wing and putting on another one with 3 vanes on it, and all this kind of thing. As Keith says, it's just pot luck if you walk by at the right time, really. That's all it is. Because you can't really, there's no commentary, obviously. There's no, you've got CCTV and you've got the window from the media room, but that's all you've got to really go off. And then the feedback of anyone else who's just been out and come in and said, have you seen what they're running? But, it's only really pot luck that you spot all the things that they're testing or anything else. The mechanic standing around the front of the bike is always a good clue that there's something they're trying to hide. But yeah, the Aprilia guys, in fairness, they're pretty open. Their garage, they're like, well, here it is. Take a look if you want. They're not afraid of anyone, I think. And getting back to the bike, again, they've sort of done the Ducati thing. They've made it better without going radical and sort of taking a step back. And I think that's the key thing. They built on the strengths of last year's bike. Aleix was kind of, it's good, but is it going to be enough? I think, it's that psychology of keep pushing the factory perhaps until the first round, isn't it? Never say, it's fine, guys. Take the next few weeks off. So Maverick was more pleased. He felt the bike was more towards his natural style. It's taken Maverick a while to get, used to the sort of, the strengths of his riding style and everything else. And he thought the bike did go more. I'd say he was more happier with the changes than Aleix. Let's put it that way. But, top speeds, they were quick. They were as quick as, I think, Bagnaia. I think they've set out the foundation for another strong season. I put it that way.
Problem you have at Aprilia is Maverick Vinales. He wins the testing award every single year. He's always fast in testing. Early on in the season, you think, Maverick, it's going to be his year. Question is when we get to racing with Maverick Vinales. It's when he's hassled on the racetrack. And I think Aprilia need 2 top runners at the front pushing. Maverick's always great in testing. He's always leading he's on the top 3 generally over the years. And again, this year he's looking really like a lot of promise. But would you put any money on him? Maybe if it was long odds.
I'm going to get you both, and including me. We're going to do our predictions before the season starts. So you're going to have to.
We will this year. Yeah, we should we? Because Keith insists he's won last year's, didn't he? And we didn't record it. So.
Yeah. Go on, Pete. Sorry, you were
I
about
was
to
just
pick up
going
on
to say,
something.
specifically talking about Maverick, he was saying what he likes about the changes for the 23 bikes. He can control the exit of the corner, the spin. He said the bike was spinning quite a lot on the way out of the corners last year. That's the area where he felt it's made a step with his 23 bike. And as Keith says, it sounds like they're going to have more from the engine coming at Portimao. So. All looking good for Aprilia. And as you said, they've got the satellite team in there as well. Oliveira was very quick, I think, on the second day, wasn't he? He was, second fastest.
He's a thinker. Oliveira is going to be a real asset, in my view, to Aprilia.
You're going to put some money. You won't put money down on Mav, but you'll put money down on Miguel, won't you, for this year? I reckon.
Well, I think he's got headroom. I think it's one of those situations where he's got potential to be better than what we're thinking he might be. And I think there are some riders where you think to yourself, they're at the top of their game. Is there any more to come? keeping with Aprilia, I mean, Aleix Espargaro, would you have Aleix winning a championship? I think he had his opportunity last year. I'm not sure he's going to get another one this year. I would. This is not controversial, and I'm going to get slapped for it, but that's fine. Write in, please, crash.net. Is that I think Maverick Vinales technically is a faster rider than Aleix Espargaro, but yet it's Aleix Espargaro that always comes up with the goods because he never gives up. He's a tough rider. He's a fast rider, obviously, but I think Maverick Vinales has the quality as a rider to be faster than Aleix, but he never seems to be able to put that together. Will it be a year this year where he can? If the bike suits him, he's the kind of guy that if he's got the kind of care in the team now. They've shown that they love him and he needs a bit of that hugging. If he's got a bike that's performing in the way that he wants it to as well, then maybe this is Maverick's year to come back. Or maybe again, I'm bigging him up at the beginning of the year, only for him to sort of fall backwards as the year moves on. We'll see.
I still remember it like it was yesterday that we spent the entirety of, I think, 2021 season break talking about, Maverick Vinales' head and mind space, and, he had falling out with Yamaha. So it's so interesting to see how far, that he's come just in that short space of time. And now clearly it looks like he sort of made the right move in the end, because if we go to Yamaha, well, the big talk, of course, was, are they going to sort this engine out? Can they give Fabio more top speed? Pete, they seem to be a little bit coy, but they seem like they found a little bit more, but they're still worried about qualifying pace. They had some sort of tyre disaster on the final day by the sounds of things. Fabio wasn't happy about that.
Yeah, it was sort of another one of these unexpected issues. It was all looking pretty good, actually, up until the last day. On day 2, Quartararo set a really good top speed. And so day 2 was a bit, because Keith mentioned the weather, day 2 was the worst for the weather. So they got the least amount of dry time then. But still, he set, he was only about less than 2k, I think, off the top Ducati for top speed. They do seem to have found something with the top speed, and with used tyres. He was happy with his pace. We won't know until they go racing, of course, because until you get the bike slipstreaming and everything else, you have a good top speed, but how quickly do you get there, for example? All those kind of things. So
top speed, Pete, if I can interrupt very slightly there. Obviously I wasn't there, but if the track was in certain condition and the Yamaha was getting off the corner that little bit better, then in a comparison, he might have just been pulling that extra 1 or 2k down the straight anyway. If the conditions were slightly iffy, how you get out of a corner onto the straight makes a massive difference by the end of it, obviously, because you're pulling the extra all the way down the straight. So maybe day 2 wasn't indicative of what the others were capable of, and Yamaha were hooking up a little better. Just a KH theory to throw in there.
Yeah. No. I mean, in fairness, he came within 1k of that on the next day, and so it wasn't. Let's say most of the guys did their best speeds on the last day. That was when we saw the Ducati and the Aprilia. They were all sort of tied at the top, 337, I think it was, and a half, which is pretty impressive. What was Fabio? 334 on the last day. So within a couple of k. I mean, again, until you see them actually racing each other, you're not sure. But it does look like they've made progress, which is what Cal's been saying, isn't it? He's been saying right since he's been testing this engine, it is quicker. But we're not going to know exactly how much until they actually race. But yeah, a bit of a tick there. I think they seem to be happy. They had 2 different engine specs. I think it was day 2. I actually asked Fabio, how many engines have you got? Because when they'd speak, they'd say the 2023 engine, which sort of makes you assume that there was one. And then, how many have you got? And he sort of, and he smiles and everything else. And he said, no, we've got 2. And we've had 2. I think they've had 2 different specs at the previous tests as well, not just at Sepang. So the big thing for them was to choose one of them, and I think they've done that now. And so when they're in Portimao, they'll have one 2023 engine all decided, and they've still got other stuff to work on. I think the aerodynamics, there was a couple of different fairings. There was the very big sort of normal wing sort of shape, you might say, and the sort of the boxy one as well. The lower parts, Keith was saying, this ground effect stuff. Do you go with the sort of the tugboat style profile, if you like, that squashes the air, or do you go with the ducts that channel the air? Those are the 2 ways people seem to be the 2 options. For example, at Ducati, Bagnaia seems to like the duct one, a bit more like last year. But I think Bastianini's leaning a bit more towards the other one. So a lot of people still have the aero stuff to finish, and they're no exception at Yamaha. But yeah, then they have this nasty surprise with they go for a qualifying lap and they're 19th and 20th on the timesheets, which imagine that in a race weekend, total disaster. Now, Morbidelli, he gave a bit more of a clue, because it wasn't just the soft tyres. It's when they go soft tyres and light fuel together. If they just put new tyres on, they're fine. They can make an improvement with let's say, decent amounts of fuel in the bike. It's when they go light on the fuel as well. So probably some sort of weight balance thing or something, who knows. But yeah.
How long have Yamaha had this problem? You can go back as far as you like with Yamaha, where the transition from having a full fuel load at the start of a race to a lighter load at the end of a race, it has made such a difference in balance. It's a tiny difference, but the riders notice it so much, and it does make a difference overall. But if you're going to qualify, if your qualifying ends up being like it did in testing on the third day, you are at sea, because there's no way you're coming through from there. Compound that with what we've been talking about, the tyre pressure thing. You're coming through a group of people, you're pushing the bike even harder, you're coming through red hot motorbikes somewhere like Sepang, you're going to be off the scale tyre pressure wise. So it's a proper problem for Yamaha at the moment to try and work that one out.
And to put a number to it, Keith, of what you're saying, I mean, Quartararo said basically winning in MotoGP now 80% qualifying. That was the figure he said. So, there you go. And of course, qualifying will now be count for 2 races, won't it? Your grid position, it's for the sprint race and for the Sunday race. So you have one bad qualifying, you've got to deal with that for 2 races. So yeah, not something that you're going to want to have this year ever. And also, backing up Keith's point, Quartararo said that. He said, look, when 2019, my first season, I think he had 6 pole positions in MotoGP. Last year he had 1. It's been going sort of gradually downwards. If you divide it up with the races, obviously 2020 there was less races, but still, if you divide poles between numbers of races, it's gone steadily downwards for him. So it's it's something that as Keith says, this is not something that's happened overnight, but certainly it stood out at the test because there was everything else looked so good until that moment, and then it was kind of like, what's happening here?
I think everybody else has got better at qualifying as well. I think that's the issue, is the fact that Ducati and the like have all got better at qualifying, and that is. But I wouldn't want to be Yamaha, not if they're qualifying way back down there. There's going to be some very stern faces coming away from this test at the minute. But Portimao, great racetrack, might just suit the Yamaha. We're going to find out.
The one other thing related to, let's say, fuel and things like that in sprint races, as we've been saying, is it sounds like teams will have a sprint race fuel tank. So they'll have a small fuel tank. It'll look the same on the outside, but the fuel will be squashed into the bit that they really, where it's really optimized. It seems some teams, I think it was Aprilia, they already have it for qualifying. I think they put 5 kilograms worth of fuel in. You have to do a couple of laps, and it holds that fuel right in the most optimum place on the bike. It sounds like they'll have a qualifying tank, a sprint race tank that'll probably be obviously a half tank, half the distance. Again, cramming the fuel right where you want it, and then they'll have the full tank for the Sunday race. So that's another new thing that they're going to have for the sprint race.
They always find that little tiny area, don't they? They always find that little tiny area. Right down to the thickness of the pipes the fuel's going through, because it redistributes wherever they want to do it. I seem to remember back in NASCAR or something, they had a certain size fuel tank, so they put dirty, great, big, thick pipes running around so they could hold more fuel somewhere else. All of these guys, they always find a way around the rules. I love it. I mean, and you're right. I mean, if you were Danny Aldridge back in the technical department, you'd say, no, you got to run the same tank throughout the weekend. And alleviate that extra cost and that extra development potential in certain areas. You just can't keep up with these guys. They're all so busy trying to find a little gap in the rule book. Brilliant.
Final thing on Yamaha, because it's easy to forget that it's actually a 2-rider team. And you mentioned his name briefly, Pete Morbidelli, about the qualifying runs on the tyre. But how was his test? What was he coming out with? Because it's a big old year for him.
It is, yeah. I think he's trying to make himself more aggressive, isn't he? It's quite funny. I asked him something about whether the top speed was helping with his riding style, and he said, my Instagram bio, because Smooth Rider was his thing. He said, I've even taken Smooth off my Instagram bio. Now, I hadn't noticed that, but there we are. He says, I'm riding aggressive now. He's going the Fabio way. That's the way that you need to ride the bike, and that's what he's trying to do. So, again, like Fabio, he was happy up until the qualifying run. And, Very
interesting you say that, because it's my belief from my experience that to make yourself more aggressive is probably the toughest thing to do. It's not there. It's like Maverick Vinales saying we need him to be more aggressive in traffic. He's fast when he's on his own and he's got his own test procedures and stuff like that. But sometimes when he's getting an elbow in his face and a few people rubbing the tire on his leg, it's not easy for him. The same perhaps was at some stage in his career with Lorenzo, if you like. It's they like that smooth. And Morbidelli is a guy that struggled after his injury. Can you manufacture aggression? I don't think you can. I personally don't. It's either in your makeup, your DNA, or it's not. Marc Marquez, my God, you wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley if he was in a bad mood and he wanted to fight with you. He'd be at your throat. But
were you aggressive?
No, not especially. I don't think.
No.
Off track, certainly, but not on.
Well, I still wouldn't want to meet you in a dark alley. I tell you that right now.
Well, no accounting for taste. But it is kind of. I don't know. You'd have to ask other people whether they thought I was aggressive. I suppose yes, I could have been. I didn't mind a bit of elbowing and pushing and shoving. But that was back in that day when it kind of was a different style of riding altogether. I think nowadays it is definitely more of a thinker's sport. But you've got that, like I say, the DNA. Marc Marquez, you ruffle his feathers, he's coming straight back at you. It is a fight. Aleix Espargaro, he will ever go back at you every time. And it always used to be said, like you might have a guy that's faster on a faster bike than you, but if you snap straight back at him when he makes a pass on you and mess him up on his next lap and you just keep doing it, they don't get a chance to get away from you because you're aggressive about it. Can you make Morbidelli aggressive? Well, we're going to find out. He might have taken it off his bio, but whether he's going to enforce it on racetrack, that's all going to be for us to commentate on this year.
I mean, I guess looking at it as a positive, if you take away the position, he's a fraction behind Quartararo. Now, so
Testing.
Yeah.
Testing is always, you're out on your own, you're running your own lines, you're thinking, you're only focused on yourself and on the track. It's a whole new ball game when you've got 23 other riders running around, pushing and shoving, and the track changes every single lap, where you can be on it because of other people on it, da. Someone trying to rush up the inside. If you've got a motorbike that's a bit slower, you might be better on the brakes, but someone's just passed you down into the turn and taken all your aero off as well. That's the other thing. With all this aero flying about nowadays, everything's all a bit destabilised. Even if the bike's in a straight line, your body's not. Your helmet's moving about. It's not quite as simple as people might think when they're looking in on it. And all of that destabilises how you are. Confidence is the big plus. You've got to have confidence in your bike all the way. And I think that's where we're seeing some of the Ducati riders have got a lot of confidence. I think that Aprilia has got room for that. I think Aleix is going to come out the box bloody quick this year. Whether he can keep that momentum going through the year, we're going to find out as everyone else catches up. And I mean, that's the other thing. It's an evolution, isn't it? From the first round in Portimao, we're going to evolve. We're going to evolve into this sprint race and all the technicalities that are going to get you fast or slow in that. And then we've got the big race on the Sunday. The workload for the techs this year is massive because, especially at the beginning of the year, as they're working their way through these final bits and pieces, just the tyre pressure thing, that's going to take 3 people to manage on its own, and so on and so forth as we move through it. It's going to be a really, really, really interesting, tough year. Do I keep saying that?
Yeah, you do. But it is. But you're right. The excitement is actually palpable, really, ahead of the new season. We've still got a few more teams to have a look at. One of which is KTM and new boy Jack Miller on the bike. But Pete Miller, I mean, he had a bit of a fall and seems to be coming out saying KTM's just struggling a little bit mid-corner wise. But obviously, brand new bike for him. It's going to take him a little bit of time to get up to speed, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. And when he says that you're right about the mid-corner part, he also means relative to the other KTM riders as well.
Right.
Not just, let's say, other riders, non-KTMs. Yes, I think it's, when during the pre-season, let's say the launch before this test, Jack was speaking about, he's got his crew chief coming over and he's really pleased about that. They've got some ex-Ducati guys at KTM, although they don't like you mentioning it. They like to point out that, riders coming with their crew chief. There's nothing unusual about that. But it's not only the crew chief. There are other people there as well, ex-Ducati. And And I think what Jack was hoping was that, let's say, some of the things that worked on the Ducati for solving problems, or the processes that you might go through the bike setup, would also work on the KTM. Now, from what he was saying after this test, of course, they lost track time, the weather, everything else. But I think it's not going to be that simple, is it? The KTM is a unique bike. It's got a different frame, this tubular steel frame, the only one with WP suspension, all this kind of thing. And, so it's just harder, isn't it? You haven't got the Öhlins guy, and all that knowledge of all the other bikes on the grid where they can go, look, this is a setting that we think is going to work because it's been working on other bikes. Let's face it, is what they're saying. Let's say in not as many words, but that's what they mean. They've got all that information. WP, they've only got that team. We're speaking about Yamaha and only having 2 bikes. It's a bit like that with the suspension at KTM as well, isn't it? And all that kind of stuff. And mid-corner, that's what, but again, Keith mentioned aero. That's now coming into the mid-corner as well. That's in with the turning. A lot of aero parts on the KTM. Nothing radical, I would say. Obviously, this is... they've got this Red Bull partnership that Keith also mentioned earlier. These parts are starting to come on stream now. I would say, looking at them, it wasn't, we didn't quite know what they were going to bring out. Were they going to come out with something completely, never before seen that's come out of the Red Bull advanced technology, isn't it? I think they're called. In fact, what it looked like is that they'd taken the ideas that KTM have had before, and this makes sense really, doesn't it? And they'd refined them. They kind of tweaked them a little bit. So the gap between the airbox and the front of the bike was a bit longer. And, it was the detailing that was really different. There wasn't a big, wow, look at that. There's another wing there or something like that. So, I mean, maybe that will come in future. But yeah, it was more like the details and things like that. But they've still got aero work to do. Now, one of the bikes sounds different. That's the other thing for the KTM. If any fans, this year, there is a noticeable difference in the sound of one of the engines. Now, whether that will be the engine they choose to race with, who knows? But they've said, so they've definitely got different engine specs or configurations that they're trying as well. But yeah, you look at the timesheets, it's not, doesn't make pretty reading, does it really? I mean, there's room to make up there, and a lot to do, I would say.
With all their effort and all our expectation, I think KTM at the moment have underperformed when it came to this test hugely, and I think that's they've really got to pick it up now. And is it too late? That's the question. Decisions are going to have to be made fairly soon for the homologated bike that's going to be used throughout the year. Jack Miller will be disappointed that his knowledge doesn't transpose across from Ducati to KTM. I don't quite know where KTM are going to end up here. This is going to be a difficult year for them again, I think. Last year was obviously difficult, but I think, looking at those times, looking at those sheets, unless I'm missing something completely from 6,500 miles away, it kind of doesn't, as you say, read very well.
Certainly lap time wise, wasn't it? I think Chris Pike he's done all the stats and the averages for everybody, which saves us a lot of work because, as I say, normally you'd look at race simulations, but because of that rain on day 2, they didn't have time. They were still doing the short runs with new parts, and that makes it difficult to really compare. But he's done all the averaging and everything else, and I think Brad Binder is the top KTM in about 17th. For average lap time over the 3 days, and the others are below him, I think. So yeah, that says it all. Now, Brad Binder was saying, look, we're working through loads of parts. We've narrowed it down. And so that's what he'll be hoping, is that they've now narrowed it down. They can put a package together that they come out with in Portimao. He's looking for that corner exit traction, a bit like what Vinales has found, it seems, with this new Aprilia. Sounds like that's where they're looking to gain, is that at the moment they feel they're losing coming out of the corners. Jack Miller also said he noticed it at Valencia on the KTM, that coming out of the corners, it wasn't, the same as the Ducati. It was almost, he felt it was a bit sort of subdued, almost overtamed by the electronics. So that's one area that they're looking for. But yeah, they certainly didn't, let's say, find the solutions to that in Sepang, tick the box. I think it is narrowing down the parts and then putting it together. I suppose if we talk about Pole, obviously coming back to the KTM, he was pretty happy. He said, I'm down the order on the lap time, but if you look at my race pace, it's a bit better and things like that. It's confusing at Sepang because the soft tyre is the race tyre. Everybody raced with the soft rear tyre at the Grand Prix last year. So it's a sort of unusual one in that not only do you use the soft tyre for a flying lap, but actually that's the one that you would do the race on. So when you put the medium, you lose a lot of time and you can end up looking pretty bad. And that's the one thing you can't see from the timesheets. We don't get the information on what tyre anyone was using as we do during the Grand Prix, where we can see, can't we, on the readouts and all the paperwork that Keith likes to go through, you actually get told this is not only which type, whether it's soft, medium, or hard, but if it's new or not. Well, you don't get any of that at a test. So again, that's the unknown there. But Pol, let's face it, he's had a bit of a disastrous year on the Honda, and he did say, look, remember, I was really quick here last year, so I'm keeping my feet on the ground because it can all change when you go racing, as Keith said earlier.
Very, very true. Well, trouble then maybe for KTM and work to do for them. Finally, last but not least, our final team, Marc Marquez Racing. Sorry, Honda. It was certainly Marc Marquez who was making the most amount of noise. Pete, wasn't he? Not at the level of the top 5, he believes. He was 10th fastest on the final day, but he was working his way through the bikes until he got down to 1.
That's right. There were 4 of them on his side of the pits. I mean, it was packed with people. If lap time was proportional to the number of engineers in your garage, they'd have been leading the test. Joan Mir actually said, what he was asked, what's the difference is, and he went, well, there's a lot more people when I come in the pit box than when I was at Suzuki. I mean, there's certainly a lot of people that headed, of course, by Ken Koachi now, the ex-Suzuki technical director. So he was over there, but we've spoken about it, didn't we, on the previous podcast? You can't instantly change a motorbike. I mean, this is going to be a long-term thing. The one thing that he could do instantly is the way that he organised the test, the way they work through things. And Mark was quite complimentary of how the structure of the test, let's say. I happened to be stood outside when, Santi Hernandez suddenly came from the back of the garage, the bit you can't see, let's say, with a load of printouts. And it was obviously a rejig of the schedule. Now, whether that's what Ken Koachi used to have on that clipboard at Suzuki, I don't know. But anyway, he was frantically giving them out to the team members, and they'd obviously had to change a plan for the remaining hours of the test, and that kind of thing. The organisation side Mark liked. He said, to be honest, the best part of it was his physical condition. And I think that says it all. That was the biggest positive for him. In terms of the bikes, he started with 4. One of them was last year, so you can cross that off the list, and he did. Another one was a really kind of radical one. He crossed that off the list after day 2. So he's then left with 2 bikes that were pretty similar to Valencia, and he narrowed that down to 1. But as he said, look, this is not going to be the bike that wins the World Championship. This one bike, this is kind of just the bike that he felt was the best of the package he had available. And he even did some laps without any wings on the bike, which caused a stir. And I mean, that probably tells you just how much... they're lacking maybe fundamental knowledge of what the wings do to actually say, look, Mark, can you go out? And I think he did 2 laps, and they didn't change the setup, so it was completely alien because the bike was set up for wings, but they needed the data.
They're looking for a baseline. They still haven't found a default baseline. They're looking to see where their baseline is, with or without the aero on it as well. So Honda have got a huge amount of work to do. I mean, it's interesting that they're investing all their eggs in one Marc Marquez basket again this year, it would seem, by the fact that he got so much stuff to test through. That is the team to watch, purely and simply because I don't think they're going to improve the bike that much, to be frank with you, but it's going to be Marc Marquez who makes the difference, as has always been the case. So we'll wait and see with Honda. But you can never rule them out because it comes back down to what we were talking about earlier. In his DNA is an absolute scrapper, and he is going to be there or thereabouts at some stage, and he's going to pull something a bit special out the bag because he is Marc Marquez.
I'm going to call it a bold prediction on the 13th of February that Marc Marquez will switch to Ducati in 2024. I don't know how, where or when or why, but that I'm going to say right now that Honda aren't going to do it from this year. Yeah, he may well be the best performer, but it's not going to win him the championship.
Haven't we already said that, Harry?
Have we said that? I don't think anyone's been as bold.
Haven't we already said that? In that I said last time out that Alex Marquez is just clearing the way for Marquez.
Yeah, but you didn't put your neck on the line and say when it was going to happen. So that's what I'm doing. I'm saying 24 Marquez to Ducati. Don't know how it would work, but that will happen because Alex Marquez has come out and been saying like he's feeling like a reborn rider on this Ducati after the test.
Well, Alex can ride a motorbike. There is no doubt about it. But he's got on with that Ducati pretty damn well. So I mean, he's another one who's been. Not a revelation because I think a few people expected it of him, but it's the first time I think I've seen him come out at the beginning of the year and look as good as he is at the minute. I mean, he's a bit of a slow burner, Alex Marquez. He gets up to the mark in a steady kind of way, but he's jumped on this bike and it's like, it suits me. And I cannot tell you how good that feels. I mean, anybody, your road car, your home car, you get in a car sometimes and you think, wow, this fits good with me. Everything's where I want it to be. It brakes, it accelerates, it corners nicely, and all the rest of it. And that's like it with a racing motorbike. You get on it when it's in its run what you brung mode. It's out of the crate, brand spanking new, never been on it before, and you get on it and think, this works for me. Pushes a little bit at the front, hangs out a little bit at the back, accelerates out. It is such a great feeling, to jump on a motorbike that does what you expect it to do as soon as you get on it, and you go fast straight away because your confidence level leaps, several segments to where you normally would be at that time of the year. So Alex Marquez could be pretty interesting this year.
And he was ahead of Mark, wasn't he? And it was quite funny. He was asked about that and he went, I've got the keys to our flat in my bag. I better get home first because I think he might lock me out. And now, what do they say? The best jokes are sort of based on reality a bit. So, I mean,
yeah,
I mean,
be happy.
Yeah, I mean, what a contrast, though. Talking about all the different bikes that Mark's got, and he was saying, he was trying all this stuff because it's what the engineers are asking for. And as you say, got Alex getting on the bike that won the World Championship last year. None of the new parts stuff, but also no unexpected problems. Just gets to ride and ride. Still got I think just braking point is really the only thing he's working on, which is a strong point for the Ducati. So he said it's important, but yeah, feeling happy, feeling great, and it'll be interesting discussions over breakfast cereal in the Marquez house, I would imagine.
After this, I know it's only one test, and there's still another one in Portimao before we go racing. But the competitive order, as you see it now, can you run it down how you think it looks? The competitive order
by bike or
by bike. Let's do by bike.
Ducati, Aprilia, Yamaha, KTM, Honda.
Okay.
Ooh, Honda at the back, like that. If I was going to change that slightly, I'd move the Honda in front of the KTM, but that would be about
I'd move Mark in front of the KTM. But if it's by bike, I think. But yeah, they're very. KTM,
you got it out of that very well, Pete.
So what happens now then in this little? Because there's a bit of a gap, really, isn't there, until March, until the next test. So what happens back at the factories? Is it ferocious work? Can the riders do anything?
There's a massive debrief, and there's a massive data download. They look at everything now. I mean, it's that time where you start to, you can make knee-jerk reactions, knee-jerk decisions, but that doesn't work. It's got to be a meticulous look through the data to see if they've missed anything while they've been on site. And there's such a lot of that to go. And I mean, there's so many variables that they don't know what's interfering with the data. Aero, how can you test, throttle pickup and then your aero? The combination of things are what makes an overall motorbike do a quick lap time. And the problem is you alter one of them and you might have to alter another one to compensate for it in some way. This is the thing with limited testing. You cannot get through everything you need to get through. It can be on a sheet, on a computer screen to try and see where the nuances are of difference that you might be able to make at the next test. But I mean, when we get to Portimao, a completely different racetrack to the one that we've just tested on, and that's the other issue. You've got, no two racetracks are the same this year. One or two have got similar corners in them, but at the end of the day, we're going to Portimao now, and it's like riding a bloody motocross track in comparison to being at Sepang. So the grip levels are completely different. The elevation changes are completely different. There are braking points where you are completely different. So it will be interesting to see whether Ducati still have the kind of advantage that they have when we get to Portimao that they had in Sepang. I suspect they probably will, but at the end of the day, for an engineer, and again, Pete's already said it. I mean, a lot of these engineers have swapped places, and they've not yet settled into the situation that they've got with their new bikes and the little tiny differences that they can make. Where are we going to find this advantage? Pete again has said, Ken Kawauchi, his mythology in the way of going about that process will be an asset. There is no doubt about it. The way that you go about it, you cannot afford to waste a second of time on the racetrack or in the garage. You've got to make everything count when you've got this limited amount of testing, and then the weather comes into it. Portimao could be red hot, or it could be absolutely blowing a gale and chucking it down with rain. we're yet to find out when we get there for the test.
Yeah, it's going to be, you've got some teams that, let's say, they're going there thinking, right, we're pretty much set here. But yeah, what if they turn up on day one and it just doesn't work? Suddenly big alarm bells ring. The race is going to be there in just a few weeks. Things could turn on their head still. And it was interesting because some riders were saying, oh, Portimao, that's better for testing the aero because it's so up and down and the winds and everything else. And then you had others that went, no, Sepang, that's a better track for the aero. So you've got all these differences of opinion as to which track is better for testing which thing, and you've just got two tracks of data, and you're trying to predict what will work over an entire season on all of these different circuits and all these different conditions. So, yeah, I mean, it's so hard to do, isn't it, to make a judgment call on what you're gonna pick. But they're going to have to do it, especially in terms of the engine. And then second to that, the aero. They're allowed one update to the aero during the season. But the engine is done. Once they pick that, that's it. They're racing it all year.
Engine is really the easy part, isn't it? Because engineering-wise, they're already out of time. There's nothing they're going to be able to manufacture now within the time they've got. So the engine's the easy bit. That's what you're having. You might be able to make a few minor detail changes to it, but you're not going to be able to make anything massive to it. So that's done. But the aero is going to be critical. And again, it's all about velocity. You've got some fast corners at Sepang where aero really will be coming into its own. When you've got the velocity of a motorcycle squidging down in the track, but when you get into sort of hairpins and tighter stuff, has hardly any effect on it. It's aero doesn't really count when you're going slow. Mate, I don't know whether I'd want to be a tech this year. They've got miles to do. We got more Grand Prix than ever. We got more races than ever. Across I don't know how many continents. It is going to be, they're going to be hanging come halfway through the season. That first break that they get, they're going to need.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't be surprised. Just one more thing on the aero. I wouldn't be surprised if more than one factory is holding something back. That they're pretty confident is going to work because the Portimao test will be too late for the others to copy, won't it? Really. For the start of the season. So if they've got something that they didn't want people to see, maybe they've done loads of laps on it with a test rider, some obscure circuit somewhere with no cameras, and they're thinking, we'll just save that one. There were a few teams that said, we've still got parts that we haven't, aero parts that we haven't tried yet. You'll see them at Portimao. So, yeah.
This again is where Ducati have a massive advantage, isn't it? Because, they can start with different riders on different aero packages. So they've got stuff that they can spread out. Give me a slap for this, Pete. I haven't read this year's rule book. Very remiss of me. They're allowed one aero change again still, aren't they, in the year?
Yes.
So they can. So that I think that's
so that they will have to decide what they're going to start the season with, and then one update. So you couldn't, let's say, gain an advantage by coming out with some of the Portimao test. Others could still introduce it during the season, but you're forcing them to use their one update on what you might have started the year with. So you might then already have one update in your back pocket yourself. So you could make another step, whereas they're just catching up with you. So, yeah, aero is going to be one to watch at Portimao. I think it's 11th, 12th of March.
And this, again, is coming back to what we talked about right at the very beginning of this podcast, with Yamaha being at a disadvantage. They have no aerodynamicist in-house. They have no association with a Formula One team or the like that have got that kind of experience to make it work. I know that on a motorbike is completely different. Obviously, you've got a flat plane with a Formula One car, but at the end of the day, aero works in a specific way. If you have aero experience, you'll be able to pretty much work out how it should affect the motorbike at whatever angle and so on and so forth. And this ground effect thing, for me, who'd have thought ground effects would work on a motorbike? I mean, it's just brilliant from my perspective. It's so brilliant, I wish they'd never ever done it, because it's just going to mess the whole thing up. But Yamaha are right at the very, the weakest point with this. They're going to have
less bikes as well, so less data.
Well, that's exactly my point. Yeah. They don't have, whereas you've got 7 or 8, Ducatis that they can spread the aero load over, if you like, or the testing load over. With Yamaha, they got 2 bikes with 2 guys on. Is Morbidelli up to speed? We're going to find that out. Quartararo obviously is, but it's going to be a situation where they can't physically get through testing that kind of stuff, and they don't have the backup that everyone else seems to have. Back in-house, back at the factory. So Yamaha, again, unless they get very, very lucky with what they choose to start the year with, they may be at disadvantage come mid-season again with that package.
Oh, it's going to be good, isn't it? Can't wait for Portsmouth testing, and then we get underway with round 1 in about 6 weeks, so still a bit of time to fill, but don't worry, we'll be here every week. I think we shall leave it there, gents. We'll leave it there then. I think we're all very excited for what's to come. 6 weeks until race 1. We've got a bit of testing, but we'll be here every week. Until then, thank you for sending your questions. To be honest, the guys kind of answered them all within all the chat. So keep them coming in. You can send them to podcast@crash.net, written, or you can voice note us your question and get it played out on air. 30 seconds, leave your name and where you come from. Keep across crash.net for all the very latest news in the meantime, and we shall be back same place, same time next week. Make sure you follow us, Crash MotoGP, and all the socials. Leave us a review if you can, please. Really important, especially on Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you next week. But from myself, Harry Benjamin, Pete McLaren, and Keith Ewan. Bye-bye.